Good morning, everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us today on this very important topic of saying no to unconscious bias. I am Violet Bell. My background includes a very varied background. Much of my time was spent in financial services. I served as CIO in many different industries, as well as a partner with Accenture and running financial services at Adobe. And now I'm back in the world of the CIO at Apptio in TBM. And the last month or so, we have spent a lot of time at Apptio on diversity and inclusion, making sure that we have opportunities for employees to voice their concerns, to learn about what it means to be treated fairly in the workplace. And unconscious bias has been coming up very often as a running theme. So today's theme is going to be saying no to unconscious bias. And I'm joined by three wonderful panel members. And I'll start by introducing Kim Jenkins, who joins us as a Chief Diversity Officer at PayPal. And her background is pretty impressive. She has served as CFO and process improvement roles at impressive companies such as Bank of America and Deutsche and JP Morgan, hitting all the top banks. Kim, welcome.
Thank you.
And next we have Eugene, who's a leader in technology business management, as well as digital transformation. And he's a much sought after speaker and has written many articles on this topic. Wes believes in people first in technology and actually serves on our TBM council board. And Wes works currently at R1 RCM. Wes, would you just share just a few words on what your company does and how you are a user of Apptio?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much for inviting me to this panel. So R1 RCM, the RCM stands for Revenue Cycle Management, and what our company is purpose-built to improve the patient experience by providing services and wraparound technologies that enables providers and first responders to stay focused on the patient and what matters the most, while we take care of all the back end from patient scheduling and registration to all the way through billing, coding, and ultimately through processing claims in a way that really takes that burden off of our providers, our patients. And in this age of COVID-19, we're enabling a lot of technologies that enable them to do this in a contact-free, contactless way so that they can stay safe. As far as my engagement with TBM, I enjoy being part of the council, of the advisory board, and really driving best practices around this groundbreaking methodology that is frankly premised on the principles of transparency and diversity in technology spend. And beyond that, as a user and proponent of Apptio throughout my career, it's been a crucial element, incredible platform and technology to really drive the right conversations about cost, quality, and value at the highest levels of the companies I've been fortunate enough to be a part of.
Thank you, Wes.
Sure.
And next we have Pedro Garcia, who's no stranger to me. We work together at Accenture as partners, and we've solved many client issues in technology, in transformation especially. And Pedro comes to us with a long career spanning over 28 years at Accenture. And he is a global client account lead for one of the largest global banks, top 3. And he led efforts in LATAM. And he has a very unique perspective because he is on the board of the largest community for Latinos. It's called Alpha. And Pedro, we are looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that later on. So welcome.
Bayer, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel.
Of course. So let's kick it off. And shall we kick it off with Kim? As a leader in head of diversity at PayPal, can you share some of your priorities and your feelings on the importance of unconscious bias at PayPal?
I will, and I can. So first of all, thank you for having me be a part of this panel. In my role as the global head of diversity and inclusion at PayPal, as you can imagine, it is our responsibility, my team's responsibility, to build a global enterprise-wide strategy around diversity and inclusion. You use the term unconscious bias. I don't use the term unconscious bias. All biases aren't unconscious. And it is important in the work we do to ensure that all biases are addressed. We also don't use the term bias in a negative way, right? And so when you look at how some people are attaching unconscious bias to things that shouldn't be done, we look at it a different way. We look at it as all people have biases. Your brain has to process, if you believe what you read, over 11 million pieces of information on a daily basis. And so you can't by default process that much information. So your brain is helping you by making shortcuts. As a result, we all have biases. That doesn't make us bad people. That doesn't make us malicious people. That just makes us people who are trying to manage day-to-day life. And what we try to do in the work we do, the way we do that work, is try to help everybody understand if you are alive, you have biases. The real question comes into how do those biases impact the decisions you're making? And when you are making those decisions, do they potentially have impacts on others? That's how we approach the work around bias in our environments. What we also try to do is make sure everyone understands that this work around diversity and inclusion is supposed to impact everyone. It's not supposed to feel exclusive. And so we focus more on the inclusion part of it and less on the diversity part of it. I always say giving people credit for diversity is like giving a fish credit for swimming. We are all diverse by default. The question is, in our environments, are we being inclusive? And so when we think about diversity and inclusion, we add a couple of other terms to it as well. We incorporate equity and belonging. We are very deliberate about our word choices. There are some words we will not use. There are some things that are attached to negative connotations that we believe make it difficult for us to shift a culture if in fact we continue to permeate those negative connotations. And so the work we do is really about helping everybody understand this is a collaborative journey that is supposed to benefit all of our resources around the globe. Be very mindful of the fact that US-based diversity is very different than how diversity is experienced outside of the US. It's experienced very differently by all different types of individuals. And so our work is focused on the entire life cycle of talent development. Lots of efforts are focused on the front end, attraction and recruiting. But then what happens when you attract, recruit, and hire and onboard? All the other pieces of the cycle become significant as well. So it does not help if you just do recruiting if you're not paying attention to retention. So all the things in the middle are important as well. We're really focused on community engagement, community involvement, business development as well. And so those are our pillars of focus at PayPal. I gave you a little bit about how we think about the diversity and inclusion journey and equation at PayPal. And that's really the work that we're doing. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, that's wonderful. It's especially interesting that you mentioned that diversity is just as natural as anything and unconscious biases are just as natural as anything. And I like your analogy of it's like a fish in the sea, you know, it's a fresh perspective. Thank you for that.
No worries. I think you get that perspective because I'm a CPA and a finance professional. So everything has to be logical and linear for me. And so when I start thinking about what makes sense and how do people hear what we're trying to say. That's the approach I take to this work.
I love it. I love it. So my next question is for Pedro. Pedro, Accenture just appointed a woman CEO. Share with us, if any, how she is changing the efforts of diversity inclusion at Accenture. And is there a specific focus on unconscious bias?
Thank you, Violet. Excellent question. I think under Julie leadership, our commitment in Accenture to equality has never been more important. We will continue taking action to accelerate that change. We truly believe that embracing inclusion and diversity is essential to innovation, to our success, and of course, is the right thing to do. Okay, I'll give you some numbers because I think numbers, I'm not a CPA, but numbers speak for themselves, right? I think we publicly announced on September 1st to increase representation of African American and Black and Hispanic American and Latinx people overall, and also in our managing directors population. By 2025, we will increase the representation of African American and Black people from 9 to 12%. And in the case of Hispanic American and Latinx people, from 9.5% to 13%. That represents a 60% increase in the number of our people. In the case of the managing directors, the number of our African American and Black and Hispanic American and Latinx will move from 2.8 to 4.4, and in the case of Hispanic American, from 3.5 to 4.7%. Another key aspect on this effort is since 2016, Accenture is the first professional services company that has been publishing comprehensive US data. We have annually released those demographics, workforce by gender, ethnicity, persons with disabilities, and veterans. We think this is really important. That reflects the type of commitment we have with inclusion and diversity. And in 2020, we began reporting the number of people who self-identify as gender, non-binary, and LGBTQ. Okay, I hope this data reflect the type of commitment that we have, and is reflected every day with the things that we do, and in the market, and with our people to create opportunities for them to grow.
That's impressive. That's really impressive. A lot of companies, having grown up in technology and technology consulting, I have to say that Julie Sweet's, push to make sure that managing directors and partners are represented in those numbers of African Americans and Latinos is very impressive, because most companies, they have a large percentage of women, they have a large percentage of diverse backgrounds, but not in leadership. So it's really impressive to hear that. Bravo. Bravo, Julie Sweet.
Thank you.
So my next question, of course, is for Wes. Wes, you are very unique as a technologist, and having hired many IT professionals in your career, what hiring practices do you employ when you focus on unconscious bias, and how do you include some of that in your hiring practice to diminish unconscious bias?
Sure, thanks for the question. So I'd like to emphasize a few things here. In my own journey, one of the things that's been really key is demanding diverse and inclusive, taking an inclusive approach and demanding diverse candidates for every opportunity. And when I say diverse candidates, yes, of course, we can always think about what comes rapidly to mind as in terms of ethnicity, but I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about in every diversity, I want to make sure I have veterans represented. I want to make sure that there's diversity in age and even in ability. from the standpoint of those folks who are facing challenges in mobility or other things, so long as it's not something that would deter them from being successful in a role. So looking for diversity, insisting on a diverse panel of candidates is really critical. The other point I'd like to make is that I&D is not HR's job, right? And for every technology leader that sits back and says, oh, well, you know what, the talent acquisition team, won't give me a diverse slate. I mean, I keep asking for it, but they don't give it to me. That's a cop-out. I grew up on the mean streets of Miami, and back then we'd say, that's weak, okay? It's a leadership imperative, especially in technology, for us all to insist on that diversity. The talent is out there. I know it. We all know it. There's a significant wealth of diverse candidates at every level out there. We're just looking for the right opportunity to have the right conversations. Beyond that, HR, though, can be a strategic partner. And our SVP of HR, Talent, and I&D at R1 RCM, LaShonda Jackson, she helped us with the sponsorship of our CEO, Joe Flanagan, and the partnership and leadership of Julia Davis, our CIO, to launch Inclusion and Diversity Day, and provided really strong tools for every leader to walk their teams through very critical, tough conversations about inclusion and diversity, and marshaling employee engagement and changing leadership practices at this time. So, finally, I'd just say, if your leadership team does not look like your customer base, you're off track. You've got to make sure that the representation of where the green comes in looks like your leadership team.
Spot on. I love that last point. You do need to look like your customer base. I mean, women like to work with women, right? Ethnic groups like to work with ethnic groups. There's already a commonality there. They say that when you walk into a room, it takes someone several seconds, maybe 15 seconds, to make up their mind if they want to work with you. And if you already have that gender or color or background, it makes those 15 seconds very important. So thank you. That's wonderful, Wes. You guys are doing a really wonderful job there. So now we've all talked a little bit about how our company is representing diversity and inclusion and focusing on unconscious bias. I want to take a little turn, and I'll start with Kim. Kim, the turn is, I want to just have you guys share a little of your personal experiences. So you had a long, wonderful career in financial services and finance as a CFO for many organizations. Help us understand the journey to becoming the Chief Diversity Officer at PayPal. What made that move?
So I'm actually the global head of diversity and inclusion at PayPal, which is just a little bit different.
Correction for me, thank you.
PayPal terminology, just a little bit. So there's a long story behind it, but I'll give you the short version. Okay. Throughout my entire career, for reasons that Wes just eloquently articulated, I have been involved in D&I initiatives. I've been involved in hiring practices and mentoring and sponsoring, because I have always felt as if it is everybody's job to do diversity and inclusion. At the end of the day, hiring managers make the decisions about the hires. And so while the HR processes help to manage that and help to effectively usher that and operationalize that, it is the hiring manager that's making the decision. And so I ultimately believe that everyone needs to be involved in the D&I process. And so I've been involved in the process, all of the processes all along. I also have been involved in the data and aspirations. So just make up some numbers here, not to sound similar to any numbers Pedro mentioned, but I would see things like we're going to go from 2% to 4%. Well, why is 4% the number? And what does 4% really mean? And what's the N that we're basing that 4% on? So are we increasing by one person, but the percentage sounds really good, so people get excited when you say that? What are we actually doing? So as a finance person, I've always wanted to see, show me the data, show me the analytics, help me understand, but also show me the representation of the population. So is 4% a good number, or is 4% just a number that makes us feel good about making some moves, right? So I've always wanted to see information and data like that. And so because I asked a lot of questions, I would always have to get more and more involved. And at the time when our then Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at a prior organization was retiring, I was asked if I was interested in taking that seat. And I actually wasn't. And I wasn't more than once, until I realized I probably wasn't being asked. I probably was being voluntold that it was the right role for me. And it went back to something I had written in my legacy statement during an executive development program. My desire has always been to give the underrepresented individual hope that even if you don't see yourself, you should aim for that seat. And so as I thought back about that, I realized I could probably assist more people if I was willing to take a move into the D&I space. And once there, I realized if you manage it with facts and data and are clear about what your intent is your intent to increase your population by 2%, or is your intent to actually ensure that as you are increasing that population, the systems within your organization, your environment, your culture will be equitable to all individuals within your culture. So really being able to think about what is the true end game here? Is it to increase representation, or is it to really ensure that all people have the same opportunities for success within our organization? Those are very different. Oftentimes when you hear people talk about what their D&I goals are, they appear to be increased representation. And so for me, I thought if we took it a different way and we were really focused on systems and processes and making true change, the outcomes of that would be increased representation. But if we aimed for increased representation, then we would still be failing because the internal systems wouldn't have been adjusted. So as I started thinking about, can I actually do this job as a person who thinks like a finance person? Let's see. And I really started to actually enjoy it. I also really started to figure out why some other initiatives didn't have the right intended outcomes. And so for me, it was important to say, if I think I can do this, what's the true impact? And so I thought I'd give it a shot. And then I literally thought I'd give it a shot and then go back to finance. Well, as you can see, I've never gone back to finance. I really enjoy the D&I work. I really enjoy the opportunities that exist as it's connected to creating an inclusive environment where all people have the same access to what it takes to be successful. And that is really what drives me. I didn't know it until that seat came open, and I was really excited to take it given the chance. And so I've stayed in the space since then. There's a lot of work to be done.
Yes.
And I figured, why be on the bench when you can be in the game? And so here I am.
Well, that's very admirable. You know, I think one of the most important things you said that I heard is you wanted to be the voice of the underrepresented. And that is truly admirable. Many folks get into it for different reasons, but I love that you're representing. So we're happy that you're there, representing diversity and inclusion. Look, you've made your impact as a CFO already. Now we're expecting big things from you. Thank you, Kim. That's wonderful.
No pressure, right? No pressure.
No pressure. Well, you know, it doesn't sound like it's pressure for you. It sounds like it's a job that you love and you enjoy. You wake up every morning feeling encouraged. Many of us don't have those jobs. I do, but many people don't have the opportunity. And it looks like you're going to be the voice for those folks to help put them in the right direction. So thank you for doing such good work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so Pedro, I thought I would direct the next question to you. Since you are of Latino descent and you managed LATAM for financial services for many years, and you're also a board member for this largest community of Latinx, help us understand what are the discussions like there and how is that impact? And do you have a personal story to share on, where you've seen it come from all the years that you've worked in LATAM? Talk to us about that.
Thank you, Violet. It's a very nice question. In the years that I was in charge of the Latin America, I led the portfolio of financial services clients in Latin America for 7 years. And it was a great opportunity and very challenging. People who work in Accenture, we like challenges, okay? And Latin America is a continent, right? So you have many countries, but you cannot say people are of one race or even speak one language. So you really need to be open to diversity all the time. And then during those years, you had global players making significant investments in Latin America. So you had companies like MetLife, UBS, the Spanish banks, BBVA and Santander, and so many others. So I enjoyed so much the opportunity of working with the culture of those global players and also understanding the differences in each of these countries to make sure that that effort will not be lost. So they really could work together, create really those synergies and create something that is bigger than the operating model or the culture that comes from the headquarters of that company. And also, what is specific to the characteristics of that country. That for the same company, like let's say BBVA or Santander, making an investment and implementing their banking model in Brazil could be completely different to Chile because comes with different cultural, challenges. So during those years, I was open to learn every single day, to understand what was important for the local people, to understand what was important for the people coming from this global player in their headquarters, and creating the bridge, the cultural bridge. Because, the technical skills are technical skills and are really important. But what really makes things work is when people communicate and sync with people. And you and I have discussed that many times.
Yes, we've had good discussions.
People talk to people and people connect with people. So my personal story is very simple. After very successfully, I led that portfolio that had like a growth of 40% per year during 7 years. I was asked to take the responsibility in the US to lead one of these global banks. And as you know, this is a very global player. So even though I had my experience in the technology arena and, I'm a computer science engineer, what really, I think, made me good for that role was my ability to bridge cultures and to deal with people of different backgrounds and to have basically the patience to deal with problems in a way that we could find a point of encounter between the two parties. And that's something that has been clear 9 years ago. It's clear now. So we continue growing, serving better this client. And I'm super happy that today we have more than 1,500 people serving this client in 20 countries.
Wow, that's impressive. Well, you are very patient to work with. We've worked for a long time together.
Yes.
And you're surrounded by a lot of women with your 2 beautiful daughters and your gorgeous wife. So thank you for the impact that you've made in the Latinx community, Pedro.
Thank you.
So Wes, I have a very interesting question for you to close out our panel, and it's one that's dear to my heart. The digital revolution is now, it's here, and especially during the pandemic, e-commerce has increased. It has become the forefront. And on everybody's mind is human ethics in AI and machine learning. Help us understand how your company or how you're thinking about that and what you're seeing in terms of what large companies are doing to address this.
Sure. No, thanks for the question. So I'll start with what R1 RCM is doing. As you can imagine, being a healthcare services company enabled by innovative technology, when we're serving the healthcare population, it is a very definition of diversity. And unfortunately, in healthcare throughout history, we've had different examples of where there has been a lack of inclusion in really taking in and contemplating a diverse population that leads to poor outcomes in disadvantaged communities and underrepresented communities. One of the things that we're doing is we are insisting that our product teams, number one, are diverse and inclusive. So diverse and inclusive technology comes from diverse and inclusive teams and leaders. If you don't have that as the base, it's never going to happen. Sure. So that's one imperative. The other imperative is really, again, putting the customer experience first. And in our example, the patient experience. And that patient looks like me, looks like you, looks like Kim, looks like Pedro, looks like Todd, looks like all of us, right? And so if I focus on a persona that is limited, then the health, it's little wonder why even during this pandemic, we're dealing with disparities in outcomes that we could directly attribute to the fact that our systems, even the systems of automation we've created, AI and machine learning, we've been feeding them disproportionately a lack of diversity in information. And so the outcomes are hyper focused on optimizing outcomes for the data set provided. You know, I think back to Kim saying she's a finance person and it's all about the facts and the numbers. If your inputs are slanted, your outputs are going to be slanted as well. So that's really critical, and these are some of the changes we're doing at R1. I think as a technology community, we have to think more broadly about this. I personally have been very fortunate to serve under a brilliant leader in Julia Davis, who's recognized and made diversity and inclusion in her leadership team an imperative. And because of that, I've been able to drive changes in digital transformation at both AFLAC and now R1 RCM. One of the key things that's happened during that journey is we evaluate a lot of technologies. One of the technologies that I had an opportunity to evaluate was a technology that used facial recognition, AI, and machine learning to basically give you a health score and help insurers to predict what kind of risk you were. The challenge with technologies like this, again, is if all the inputs don't look and don't reflect the diversity of our communities, then they're going to be limited in their efficacy. And as a result, it's going to impact the profitability even of technologies like this. So that was one of the challenges that they identified. A book I would recommend to everyone is please read Building for Everyone. Expand your market with design practices from Google's product inclusion team. This is written by my friend Annie Jean Baptiste, head of product inclusion at Google. And it just so happens, you know, when I think about this and double click, Annie and I both share a Haitian heritage. So when we think about diversity and inclusion, I want to end on a personal note, just to challenge us all, think more broadly. When you look at me, yes, I'm an African-American. Yes, I'm a technologist. I'm also the son of immigrants, okay? I'm also a flute player. who would imagine that I would be, you know, of all instruments, I would be playing the flute. And so diversity doesn't stop at the superficial levels. We really need to challenge ourselves to think very broadly and use that inclusion to drive really, it's the right thing to do, and it drives the kind of outcomes we need. So I'd like to submit that for everyone's consideration as they continue their I&D journeys and really embrace belonging and equity.
Thank you for that challenge. And it's wonderful to hear that, you know, you're combining statistics with facial recognition to help address the issues that are sometimes about gender, about color, about race. So thank you. I have enjoyed this past hour with all of you. Thank you for your time today. Kim, I hope you're not late for your lunch with your mom. Wes, thank you for always being the voice of Apptio. Pedro, look forward to speaking with you soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for sharing your company's perspective as well as getting personal. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much on behalf of Apptio. Thanks very much.